We're here in Shakespeare, Stratford, and with me today is David Curtis, who is the Conductor and Artistic Director of the Orchestra of The Swan. Hi, David.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, pleasure, pleasure.
I'd like to ask you the personal question. We'd talked about this before. When we spoke about music and how you came to it, you said to me that you never had a silver spoon in your mouth and you never had any music in your background, meaning you're from a working class family. Can you tell me how you came to play music, conduct music, and eventually set up your own orchestra?
Gosh, yes. That's quite a question. It's true. My parents were both very sort of working class background, if you like, both born at the end of the First World War. So I was quite a late child, if you like. My mother was daughter of a farm labourer in Kent. My father left school at the age of 14, no qualifications. His mother was a single parent who was also profoundly deaf in the Depression. My grandfather on my father's side had been gassed during the First World War. So pretty tough upbringing there. And I sort of mention that only because I think it's really important that music, great art, culture can be accessible to anyone. That's why the reason behind mentioning it. You don't need you don't need to own a dinner jacket to come to one of our concerts. You don't have to be posh. I'm not at all posh. I've been extremely fortunate, and there was no music in my household, and for some strange reason, I've no idea why, but we had an old violin up in our attic, and school teachers can make such a profound difference. And in my primary school, a new teacher arrived, and in the second year that he was there, he suddenly decided that he was going to start a violin class. And when it got to my year's turn, in the first year, I think there was a group of about 8 children learned to play the violin. And when it got to my year, and I was about 9, I guess, for some reason, I asked my parents if I could learn to play the violin. And we'd got this old violin up in the attic. And that's how it started. And the usual sort of things. I mean, I went through various stages of wanting to give it up and spend more time on Saturday morning playing football and all the rest of it. But I think by the time I got to the age of 14, 15 or so, I decided that I was getting keen. I joined the local youth orchestra, probably some nice girls in the local youth orchestra. And I think certainly by the time I was 16 or so, I decided that, that's what I wanted to do, go into music college and see what happens. Wow.
And what happened was you set up the Orchestra of the Swan in 1995.
Yes.
That's over 20 years ago.
Yes.
The world has changed a lot. Have you seen any change, any of that change, and particularly, I mean, the rise of the iPad generation? Has it become tougher?
I don't think it affects performance that much. I mean, I'm probably terribly old-fashioned, but I think what we do is as relevant now in as much as what we're doing is live performance. And although music has been extremely accessible via LPs or CDs or downloads now, I mean, really, recorded music has been around for, oh gosh, not quite 100 years, but 80 years or so. I don't think it's dimmed the enthusiasm for hearing performances live. And I think that's true whether it's live music, live theatre. live sport. I mean, you know, the football stands are still absolutely packed out on a Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, although you can see it on live television. And I think what we have to always do, and I don't know if this is the right answer to the question, is to make sure that the live experience is different. I mean, it is different. The live experience, you know, particularly in a small venue as we are here, the audience and the orchestra, we can see the white of each other's eyes, if you like. And I think there is that point that an audience, whether it's a football match or a chamber orchestra concert, the audience is part of the show, part of the performance, part of the match. You imagine going to a football match and the crowd sitting there in deathly silence. It's obviously a very participatory event in a football stadium, but I think even in a concert where there may be silence, if you like, but I hope it's not that sort of reverential silence, we mustn't move, we've got to be still until it's our turn to clap. I think hopefully it's a participatory silence, and there is that real sense of dialogue. If we get it right, and we have to get it right, there's a real sense of dialogue between audience and orchestra.
So going back to the theatre, the parallel with theatre.
Yeah.
Some people have been saying for ages that it's going to diminish the importance of live theatre because it's too expensive to produce and too expensive to enjoy if you have access to, you know, digital theatre, so to speak. So are you saying you haven't noticed in the last 20 years a threat to live classical music?
I think generally audiences are really strong. I mean, we've seen our audiences, I can't say that every year the audience is bigger, but generally our audiences have grown. I mean, sometimes there's a glitch. A few years ago, our audiences fell away a little bit, perhaps because of the recession, but they've built up. Here in Stratford, every concert has been sold out. We've got new concert series over in Worcestershire. There the audiences are growing. So I think there's every reason to be optimistic. I think we have to work really hard to market and promote why it's so great to go to concerts, or, you know, to go to live theatre. I suspect it is probably the same in the theatre world. I don't know. We do have to work very hard at it, but I think I suppose I have to be optimistic, otherwise I wouldn't get out of bed in the mornings. This job is far too difficult.
And you have a concert tonight.
And we have a concert tonight, yes.
So this brings me to one of the aspirations of your orchestra. You say you stand for excellence, you stand for innovation, and you stand for accessibility. And accessibility is where I'd like to stop, because excellence we can pretty much understand. Innovation we'll come on to. But accessibility, that's where I come in. Basically nil musical training, about 20 hours singing time throughout the whole of school life, and but bags of appetite. Do you need to make it accessible to people like me, the classical music that is perceived to be so heavyweight and difficult to understand, and only for those who can decipher it or have the training for it?
I think that's it's a very difficult question to answer. How do we make it accessible? I think the wrong way of doing it is dumbing down.
Okay.
Just because somebody has not been to an orchestral concert before, and I think in the UK it's only about 7% of adults who have been to an orchestral concert. Yeah, that's a very small minority of people, actually. I think my personal view is that if we can get people through the door, and that's a challenge in itself, how we demystify that. If we can get people through the door, and perhaps they'll come to a pre-concert chat, or if there's particularly new work in the programme, playing a few excerpts, illustrating it. even as tonight, before we start the concert, I will just say a few words. I'll keep it fairly short, but you know, the Mozart symphony we're playing tonight, it's really dramatic, full of angst, and you know, it's I hate this phrase, the world's most beautiful music that Classic FM comes out with Mozart. I mean, this symphony tonight, it's really turbulent and dark and vigorous and passionate. And then actually the second work we're playing, this Shostakovich, that's a difficult 20th century composer. This is music he wrote for incidental music to a version of Hamlet that was basically an ironic, sardonic view of Hamlet, pointing fun at Stalin and his cronies. So it's full of circus music. It's extremely light-hearted, some of it. And I think if, you know, at the beginning of the concert, I say, you know, this is great fun. In some ways, if you tell an audience they can relax, this is going to be great fun, or here's the most beautiful love song, and I think it's that thing of enabling an audience, or not an audience, there's no such thing as an audience, enabling individuals in the audience to make their own relationship with the music, and let it sort of perhaps open a window, suggest a door, perhaps you know, one of the movements of the Shostakovich say, you know, I wonder which clowns this reminds you of, or there's one of the movements is straight out of a silent film movie. You know, why do you know, which is your favourite silent film movie? This is going to remind you of it. And then you're taking down, and as when we play that number, people will be thinking, oh yeah, this is great. This is silent film music. It's not classical orchestral music that's difficult to listen to. So I think creating those opportunities for people for individuals to develop their relations, and also I think, as we said, we spoke about this briefly the other day, we're surrounded by classical music. You know, 90% of adverts, or 90%, I made that up, but you know, an awful lot of adverts. The Hovis ad, very famously, what, 20 years ago probably, or whatever it was. You know, the slow movement from Dvorak's the New World Symphony. It's a great melody, and there's so much orchestral. I mean, I don't like the word classical because I think that in itself creates barriers. People think, oh, it's difficult, and then you combine it with the words chamber orchestra, classical chamber. You know, who would want to go to something like that?
Okay.
You know, can't blame people for staying away, and that's incumbent on us to work really hard to break down those barriers and enable. And certainly when people do come in, then back to your point about accessibility, I think it's a word that has all sorts of connotations. I mean, obviously, some of it clearly is providing access for people who may use a wheelchair or whatever. So that's one type of accessibility, but I don't think that's the main issue, because we could have lots of people coming in who are physically challenged, disabled, whatever we'd like to say. We could create all the physical means for people who have those problems or those issues to come and sit in the concert, and then we could be so aloof that we've created the physical access, but if we hadn't created the access to the music, there's no access at all.
So you seem to be saying that you can just set out the picture and tell a little bit about the story behind the piece of music, and that's it. So you're not saying that we need to train our children to listen to it from a young age, to get used to classical music, and
I think
to educate people.
I think the arts has a huge beneficial place in children's education. There is, you know, there is so much wrong, personally, I think, with the educational system in the UK. Art and music have proven value in enabling children to develop better numerical skills, better language skills, better spoken skills, better skills of collaboration, all of that stuff comes from music and the arts. I don't know if, and yeah, I suppose a rounded education should include not just a reference to the great European music tradition going back to, I don't know, the 14th century, I guess. I think a good rounded education should also include the reference to the great European art tradition. So we have, and I think that's a wider point, and it's not about elitism or exclusivity, but I think we are part of that fantastic cultural tradition, and I think that should form part of any child's education. You know, I'm absolutely not in favour of ramming classical orchestral music down every child's throat. I think that would be wholly counterproductive. But I think there should be a place in education for references, as I say, to that whole European cultural tradition, because it's shaped where we are now, actually. And you know, children can then, you take one or two examples. I mean, there's some great, Peter and the Wolf. It's fantastic music, there's a great story behind it, and encouraging all of us, I suppose, children and adults, to listen more carefully. I mean, there's so much background music. We are surrounded by music. In a way, that's almost, perhaps that's a problem. It's not special enough.
Right. We take it for granted.
Yeah. It should be special. I mean, the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto we're playing tonight, I mean, I will ask the audience, because and I'm always delighted when there's somebody in the audience who's never heard something before, because for them it's really special. And I think as performers, we have a challenge every time we're performing, particularly something that's been performed by us in this orchestra or in other orchestras that we're playing in. How do we make it fresh? How do we recreate that freshness, that shock, wonder, whatever that of the first performance, when that painting of the Merchant and his Wife was first completed? Wow, you know, seeing all those fantastic fresh colours, you know, the colours in the Sistine Chapel. That's what it's a bit like. I think every time we come back to a really well-known work like Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, Mozart Clarinet Concerto, there's that job of scraping away the accretion of grime the last 200 years of performances, and saying no to an audience, you know, and I think also in a way the audience has to work at that as well. And you know, I might say to an audience, you're all coming along here, you think of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, everyone knows it. You think you know the Mozart Clarinet Concerto. You know, I think I know it, but every time I do it, every time I conduct it, I learn something new about it. So, you know, and say to the audience, okay, I want you to pretend that you've never heard this piece before. Just don't think, oh, Mozart Clarinet Concerto, I know this, I can sort of relax and sit back. No, I really want you to be on the edge of your seats listening. And actually last time we performed that piece with Emma Johnson, the last movement was a revelation. It was absolutely fantastic. She really revealed in that, and it wasn't a question of Emma layering her interpretation, if you like, on the Mozart. The way she performed it, I heard a lot of the darkness in that last movement that is there, but often it's not realised. It was stunning, and I don't know how many times I've heard that piece. Hadn't heard it like that before. To me, that was like a first performance.
David, what I'm interested in is what qualities does it take to become a good conductor? And what I'm thinking is it something that is innately male? Because until recently, we've only ever heard of a handful of female conductors. Yeah. Is that right?
That is right.
I mean,
but I don't think
ladies haven't cracked that.
No, and I think it just takes a long time to go over some of the last bastions of male prejudice. Right. I think it is happening now. I think the arts, there is certainly, I see no prejudice at all by sex, race, creed, ability, disability. I mean, the key components or the key elements we look for a player to play in this orchestra is, are you an extremely good player? Do you smile? Okay. You know, are you engaged with what's going on? That's it, as far as I'm concerned. Nothing else really matters. And I think now, you know, 50 years ago, the only female player in the Vienna Phil was the harpist. Things are changing. It's about time. It will take time for more female conductors to come through. But I think, in a way, if you look at the number of female composers there are around now, I mean, we probably commission, I think we've commissioned more new work from female composers than male composers. Not because I've set out to commission female composers, just because the composers that we've wanted to commission happen, you know, some of them are male, some are female. And to me, I honestly don't think about it. And I think the discussion now about female conductors, I would certainly hope, and I suspect that in another 10 years, which may seem a long time, but I think it'll be irrelevant. I certainly hope it'll be irrelevant. Right. Because there's, you know, I see it, but it's the same in, you know, in industry and commerce, isn't it? That a lot of the blue chip companies still, there aren't that many women in senior boardroom positions. There is a massive prejudice still against women. I mean, I have 2 daughters, and I'm shocked at some of the things that I get told. But I think we're definitely making progress. And so I don't think we'd be having this. I hope we wouldn't be having this conversation in 10 years' time.
So you seem to be saying that the qualities that it takes to become a conductor are sort of similar to the ones that it takes to get to the top of a blue chip company.
Well, I don't know.
It's not the music or the artistic element of it.
Oh no, I think it is absolutely the artistic element. But I think I see no reason why there should be any more barrier to female conductors than female soloists. And interestingly, I mean, I read just recently in the final round or the semi-final round, or whichever it was, of the London Yehudi Menuhin violin competition, I think it was only 1 or possibly 2 out of the 21 finalists were male.
Right.
We often, I mean, this orchestra is pretty evenly balanced. I mean, sometimes it's more women than men, but I think there's, as I say, real, you know, probably 50 years ago, you wouldn't have had that same proportion of male to female. So I don't see any men complaining that they're being, you know, there's, and you know, Tamsin, fantastic soloist.
But there is a difference, don't you agree, between playing an instrument and playing an orchestra? So what is it that you do that individual players can't do for everyone else? What sort of qualities do you bring to it?
It should, the qualities a conductor should bring, I think that's probably an easy way of putting it, are, I think, a vision for how the music should go. So, very simply, you know, it starts here and it goes there. That architectural vision, and the ability to, at best, I guess, inspire the musicians to help realise that vision.
So leadership qualities.
Yes.
I'd like to get this. Yes.
Yes, that's what, and you know, and understand, and then there's all the you know, you are managing a group of extremely talented people, all with their own views on how the music should go.
Yeah.
And I think there's I suppose it's combining leadership with also management. Well, yes, Stacey, that's a really good idea. I'm just not sure we've got time this afternoon to explore that further. Can we move on? Oh, that's a beautiful shape in the winds. Can we make sure that it's part of the overall line? So, yeah,
I get it.
it's a difficult one.
Yeah. I know you've been a guest conductor in various European, Eastern European and Western European orchestras. Is there a major difference between musicians and audiences around the world that you've encountered?
Yeah, I mean, China, we went to China a couple of years ago. Audiences there, completely different. Everyone walks around chatting, taking pictures on their iPhone, and all this, but it's not because they're not appreciative nor attentive. And we probably did more encores in China in 5 concerts than we do in a whole year in the UK. It is just a different culture. But I think in a way that's more as audiences in Europe used to be in Mozart's time. You know, when Mozart's operas were being first performed, an aria, you know, a particular favourite aria would be encored several times, and then the soprano or whoever might even throw in a couple of her own favourite arias before carrying on. So I think the idea that audiences have to behave as they do is quite a recent construct. And there are some differences. I mean, in Italy, in Hungary, I was in Hungary in December working in an orchestra there. In the UK, a slow hand clap, you really don't want a slow hand clap in the UK, that's death. Right. Slow hand clap in Italy, slow hand clap in Hungary, fantastic, great, it's a real result. I mean, that's a very small cultural difference, but it's worth knowing, because otherwise you might go off stage thinking, oh no, that was awful. Right. And in fact, it's a great result. I mean, there are differences, but I think there are far more, the similarities of musicians and audiences and music. You know, we're performing great music with musicians who want to perform it, to tell that story to an audience which has come along to be engaged with the music and with the story. So I think the differences then are, one needs to be culturally aware of nuance and difference, but I think the similarities, the core, is that people are coming for the music, to share that great music and to be moved by it. That's why they're there, and that's why we try and do this job. That's much more important.
Thank you. Well, this spring the Orchestra of the Swan is headlining across Stratford in various festivities organised to celebrate
Shakespeare's 400th
death anniversary. So you'll have your work cut out.
We're going to be very busy.
You're a busy man. All the best to you.
Thank you very much indeed.